I'm shortly jumping in to introduce Doris. So Delphine, do you still want to sit on the... Okay. Yeah, perfect. So Doris, we are so happy that you are here. Let me just quickly introduce you. You hold a PhD in media studies and you are working as a research curator at the Fotomuseum in Winterthur, where you are working, among other things, on the post-photographic orientation of the museum. Her research interests include contemporary photographic discourses and practices, and the network images, politics of representation, and strategies of decolonization. In 2022, you curated the exhibition on Frida Ropabo, and I'm really happy that you will introduce you and your work with Frida, and that you are introduce also the exhibition you did with her. And thank you again for your participation, and I'm really happy that you are here.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot for the invitation. Actually, our director of Fotomuseum was invited to speak, but she just had a baby, so I am here in her place to speak about the exhibition I curated with the amazing artist Frida Ropabo. We invited Frida for this talk, but unfortunately she couldn't be here. But I would like to mention that during the preparations of this exhibition, I had a lot of discussions with Frida, and Frida was incredibly generous in sharing her knowledge, sharing her experience, talking very openly about both her artistic practice, but also her life experience, and it has been an amazing collaboration. And what I am shortly presenting today is something that has emerged from this dialogue I've had with Frida. I would also like to shortly mention that this was supposed to be a discussion with Donia. Unfortunately, she fell ill, so now our discussion was supposed to be a little bit broader, and now I'm going back to just kind of talking about Frida Ropabo, and I think many aspects that were now raised in the previous discussion will come up again. And also too bad that Magnus fell ill, so now I'm here all alone at a table in a format that is supposed to be a dialogue, but it is what it is. But thank you all for being here. Just to give you a little bit of a context about myself, I have a media studies background, so I'm not very much interested in kind of speaking about what is a good image or the aesthetics of aesthetic qualities of images or kind of the frameworks that come from more of an art historical discourse. I'm very much interested in how media kind of organize our world, our perception, what kind of knowledge systems and hierarchies and value systems are kind of connected to media, how photography is entangled within these organizing structures, and what kind of organizing knowledge structures photography itself kind of spawns and brings forward, or brings about, produces. And for me, photography is really a medium in which social power structures and relations are inscribed into its technologies and practices, and therefore photography reflects on this, and it can help us reflect on these issues as well. And it really helps us to kind of think through how media technologies filter what we see and how we see something. And this is why I was so very much intrigued by Frida Oropabo's artistic practice, because she uses photography, or more specifically, she appropriates photography and uses collage to work through such questions and dynamics. And in contrast to me, who has a very kind of theoretical approach to these questions, Frida's practice, or Frida Oropabo's practice, is not following any theoretical impulse, but it arises primarily from a necessity that is strongly linked to her everyday experience. Orupabo grew up in Norway as a daughter of a white Norwegian mother and a black Nigerian father, and from very early on, from her childhood on, her body was marked as different. And this outside gaze that was forced upon her kind of also forced her to question her own identity and to doubt her sense of belonging. So this is really at the starting point of her artistic practice. She could also not really identify herself in the images that she saw around her. When she looked at advertising, when she looked at children's books, there were all kids and people who did not look like her. And she was describing this in a very touching way. She was saying, I took this advertising, I took this illustration, and I wanted to place myself in there. I also wanted to be part of that family, part of that touristic setting. So I took my own pictures, I took my limbs, and I attached them or collaged them with the image I had, which showed no people that looked like me. So this is kind of, she really started doing this at a very early age, this collaging technique. And maybe I would like to quote Frida. She says in one interview, "In the beginning, I wanted nothing but a kind of diary, a dialogue with myself, a place for my frustration in terms of ethnicity, complexion, sexuality, and gender. Creating became a means to explore, deal with and process all the negative impact racism had on me, my surroundings, and society. I lacked language, but through art, I found a way to speak." So for Frida Orupabo, her artistic practice is actually very therapeutic, and it is really vital in helping her deal with her everyday experiences of racism and sexism. Frida Orupabo was a sociologist and a social worker before she was before her Instagram was found by the artist Arthur Jaffa, and kind of from one day to the next, she became quite a famous artist. She was like catapulted into the art world. But yeah, just for you to get a sense that her artistic practice really doesn't come from artistic training, but it comes from really an everyday experience and wanting to deal with those feelings and negotiating or finding a way to negotiate themes such as identity, belonging, family, racism, sexuality, and colonial violence. So Frida Orupabo doesn't create her own, she doesn't take photographs, but she appropriates images from the inexhaustible archive of the World Wide Web. And she focuses on fragments of the Black, mostly female body, because this is the position from which she speaks. She dissects these fragments from the Black female body from historical photographs of the colonial era, as well as from images of the present. So whether from ethnography, from medicine, science, art, or pop culture, she appropriates fragments, she combines and layers. Here's some installation shots. She combines and layers, she rearranges and then patches together her paper collages using paper pins. Her collages are fragile, but at the same time, they are also very resistant figures that challenge how and what we see in a present-day reality that remains permeated by traces of colonialism. And they are really true kind of body images, Körperbilder. They are blown up in life size, and they are really treated by Frida Orupabo as humans. So when she collages them together in her home, she says that they really she kind of blows life into them, and they really become characters, people that she has in her apartment, that are on her bed, that kind of are around her, and where she really kind of thinks about how she wants to afterwards expose them also to an audience, which of them should be exposed and which of them should maybe be more kept in a private setting. So these are all things she thinks about. She treats them very respectfully as people, as subjects. And I'll stay here. So maybe just quickly something about the exhibition setup. For us, it was very important to think about also how to position the viewer, the visitors, in relation to these bodies that Frida Oro-Pabo creates with her collages. And upon entering, the first thing you saw was this very big blown up wallpaper, which is a digital collage called Turning. And you would enter the space, and you would first be really kind of stared at by this gaze. So it was about having visitors really feel this gaze, which is at the center of Frida Oro-Pabo's works. Most of her collages really have this direct gaze at the visitor, and it's something that was also mentioned before, maybe this photographic encounter, which is something that is very important in Ariella Azule's work, that it's really kind of something that has to happen, an encounter between the image and the viewer, and that we have a responsibility to look at these images from the past, also in the present, and kind of renegotiate that relationship. And for Frida Oro-Pabo, this is very important in giving the collages their agency, giving the bodies in her collages an agency, and turning them from people who were objectified into actual subjects that have the power to encounter the white gaze. And on the other side of this collage, we had the video installation, which shows an arrangement of Frida Oro-Pabo that she did on Instagram, because that's actually the format in which she worked, and it allows her to kind of have the images circulate, to have the images also move, and to escape maybe the narrow boxes that happens through the fixing of the photographic image when something is fixed and captured and kind of kept still. And with this arrangement, you have a different kind of moving and a certain kind of rhythm. And this is also what intrigued Arthur Jaffa. He said that for him, this is really the expression of kind of a Black experience, and an expression which allows, to attribute to Black people also the right to have a life that is full of contradictions, to have a life that is ambivalent, to have a life that is complex and not always be pushed into kind of fixed frames and boundaries. And it was also important for us in the beginning to have like a dark space, which puts you more into a cinematic mode of looking, or a cinematic mode of perception. We wanted this image world that Frida Oro-Pabo moves in, and which is so important for her artistic practice. We wanted people to be able to dive into that image world and to kind of encounter the images that are constantly circulating, also stereotypical images, negative cliches that are constantly circulating. And even if we don't see them all the time, they're kind of inscribed into our memory and our minds. And we wanted people to be able to sit in that image universe of Frida Oro-Pabo, but still feeling this gaze in their neck while they are doing that. So being aware of that presence of someone looking at them while they are looking, but still kind of creating maybe a safe space in the sense that it's a dark space, it's a cinematic space, so there is collectivity, but still you can kind of disappear in a way. You are not really being observed that much by the other people that are around you. The second room then was more about using the white gallery space as a direct confrontation. So you came inside, and we really focused on her collage works, which are all life-size, and creating kind of a tension of this counter gaze that is kind of staring at you when you come in and asking you to take a position as a visitor and as a viewer when you confront the collages. These are topics that already came up before, but I think Frida Ropavo's work really helps us to think through what the colonial gaze is, how it works, and how it keeps kind of perpetuating itself and keeps working and is still alive today. And her artistic practice really reproduces the violence of colonialism, in which bodies were staged for the camera, where they were fixed, they were captured, and they were framed, where they were fragmented, and they were dissected. And this modus operandi of photography made it one of the great accomplices of colonial history and violence, because photography has the power to transform people into objects, to make them possessible, to fix them, to hold them captive, and hold them captive in the gaze of those who determine their meaning and who come to possess their image and determine their meaning. Was something that Sophie was speaking about previously. And I think this is also what makes the collage so uneasy and so uncomfortable to look at, because they really make this physical, psychological, and epistemological violence which accompanies colonialism. They really make it, you feel it, they make it palpable, because she's somehow reproducing its logics, but at the same time she is transforming its appropriation into an act of resistance and reparation and healing by aiming to turn the objects into subjects. So give them an agency back that was taken from them. I'm going to skip this because this was already kind of discussed previously, about photography really being the tool not only to document but to actually establish these racial human types, because it was an objective, or it was assumed to be an objective, neutral, and therefore truthful medium. And therefore, it was institutionalized to bear witness to the socially constructed relations of domination and to neutralize them and make them appear as if they were a natural given. And it is the one-sided attributions that arise from a power imbalance that lead, or that then have led to discriminatory stereotypes, cliches, and prejudices that form the visual legacy of colonialism that still circulate in many images and minds today. Frida Ropavo challenges the binary system that denounces African people and Black identity as primitive, savage, barbaric, irrational, and underdeveloped, using it as a backdrop to construct a white identity that, in contrast, could be defined as superior, rational, civilized, intelligent, and highly developed. In this work, Batwoman, she kind of deals with these questions of primatization or animalization and human degradation of Black people, and by placing a head of a Black woman on an animal body, but she defies this racist gaze with a mixture of unwavering strength and graceful lightness. She also shows that the colonial gaze does not only racialize, but it also sexualizes, aligning the representation of women with heterosexual male fantasies by objectifying and sexualizing her. But Batwoman here, she cares very little about male fantasies. Instead of squeezing herself into a skin-tight bodysuit like the mainstream superheroine, she seems to simply use her bat-like body to flutter away from any sexist expectations. And so this work is also kind of hinting at how racist and sexist stereotypes are still perpetuated today through the entertainment industry and images used in the media. Another prominent stereotype that Frida Ropavo encounters is that of the hypersexualized Black women. In the context of the race theories, sexual characteristics also came into scientific focus. It is here that the Black female body and its sexuality were defined as deviating from the white body, and thus from the norm, which was defined as the Christian and chaste, pure and passive white femininity. Black femininity, in contrast, was interpreted as a sign of lust, lasciviousness, and lack of self-control. And this construction, this social construction that was made through the female body, it reveals a fetishizing element that was talked about, for example, by Stuart Hall, where he says that the tabooed, dangerous, and forbidden object of pleasure and desire indicates a discomfort in one's own culture, but instead of dealing with that discomfort, you attribute it to the image of the other as abnormal and morally unacceptable. And the colonial gaze becomes particularly evident in the framing of the Black female body, which experiences a singular form of sexist and racist discrimination and oppression. Here, she has also, in her most recent work, Frida Opabo has also tried to distance herself from the clear shape of the body because of these issues, because of kind of finding herself to now and again be in the trap where she might reproduce something that she actually wants to deconstruct and criticize. So this is also criticism that is sometimes heard when the works of Frida Opabo is discussed, that her works might not be powerful enough to actually challenge the colonial gaze, but that they instead reproduce the colonial gaze. And of course, this is not what she wants. This is the last thing she wants. So she's trying kind of also to work with this criticism and incorporate it into her artistic practice. And she does so by moving away from the concrete shape, by making bodies that are no longer clearly, where the gender can no longer be clearly assigned, or where the limbs may not be clearly identifiable as a leg or a foot, but where there are parts where things become more ambivalent and more blurred. What also becomes very evident in her work is that the colonial gaze racializes the world. And this racialization is really central to the organization of the modern and Western world, which is something that the film theorist Richard Dyer has shown. Whiteness is so powerful precisely because it has been elevated to an invisible and universal norm. So while the others are perceived and named in terms of their race, the Black woman, for example, white people claim the right to simply be human. Thus, their perception of the world holds a claim of universality, and racialization becomes the default setting of the Western perception of the world. And Girl on Horse, which is this work here, it speaks about this racializing default setting, which also becomes inscribed into the technologies of our representational systems. So I would like to quote Frida again. She says, "For my collage Girl on Horse, I was looking for a Black girl riding a horse, but there were so few images I could find. A woman usually means white woman, meaning that searching for images of a woman will only lead to images of white women. Whenever I need something for my work, I have to remember the category Black. Black babies, Black beautiful women, Black women riding horses. Searching for images can be at times very tiring and upsetting because it tells you in such a direct way what you already know." So, always having to add this category of Black. It's not something we think about as white people when we look for something in a Google image. So there's really kind of this whiteness as a norm, which is inscribed into this search technologies. And by adding the category Black to the search databases to get around this underrepresentation or absence or invisibility of Black women, just leads to ending up finding cliched and stereotypical representations. This is what Frida Ropabo told us about her experience in really looking for these images online. So Girl on Horse unfolds its power as a counter-image to the normative visual order. She creates, with Girl on Horse, Ropabo creates a type of image that is systematically invisible and only makes its absence within the normative image repertoire perceptible through this life-size encounter you have with it in the presence of an exhibition space. And it came up in discussions we had prior to this event that, of course, now Beyoncé, in her latest album, there is an image of her sitting on a horse. So this kind of show also shows how Beyoncé is very reflecting of, of what's happening around her, also in visual culture. So yeah, and it really speaks a lot to these issues I was just talking about, referring to Girl on Horse. And something Frida Ropabo doesn't discuss, but something that came up in the conversation. I mean, this is not just inscribed into algorithmic technologies. We also had this marginalization of the Black body in the technical materiality of early color film, which was, until the 1980s, very poor at capturing and depicting Black bodies. And by creating a film that was not able to really capture and depict Black bodies, the white skin tone inscribed into the white skin tone was inscribed into the technology once again as the norm, as the invisible norm. And then this technology creates the material conditions for it, perpetuating this white norm and the underrepresentation of marginalized groups through the poor representation of Black people. So it's kind of a circle. So in the process, technology and its constructed visibility disguise the social values that are programmed into them, because it could have been otherwise. The chemical conditions can be changed and shaped. So these are social values that are programmed into the technologies, but they appear to us as if they were neutral and natural, and there would be no other form of visibility. So essentially, to wrap it up, Frida Ropabo really challenges the white gaze through subtly resistant and emancipatory artistic strategies. She has the direct counter gaze, she has the clenched fists, she has figures that fly or remain in a graceful state of suspension. They are full of pride and dignity, and they attempt to transform the confining categories of image and imagination that they simultaneously display, or at least try to kind of show or suggest. Yes, that's what I have. Thank you. Hi. Good to see you.
Take some question for the audience. I'm curious to hear more. How do you commission and welcome such an exhibition within your institution? Is it a process that is going on in terms of programming, or how does such a work enter a collection, which I know is predominantly also white? How do you work?
Yeah, thanks for the question. This is the work we commissioned also for the show, and which is now in the permanent collection of Fotomuseum Winterthur. And for our director, Nadine Wietlisbach, who has been at the museum for the last 5 years, she really sees photography in a strong relation to social issues, to questions of social politics, and for her, kind of creating a more diverse program and thinking of creating a more inclusive museum also is really at the center of her vision of the museum. So it's something we don't just try to do by programming, it's something we also see as a broader, more complex form of institutional engagement. And of course, our collection is very wide. We have a strong focus also on US American photography, but at the same time, of course, Black voices, for example, remain basically absent. So it is very important for her, and I think for the whole team, to think very critically through issues of representation, through issues of visibility, also how we as an institution contribute to reproducing certain patterns of visuality, and not only delegate to artists to think critically about these things, but also try through the dialogue with artists to think about how we can change our institutional structures and our institutional ways maybe of collaborating, of thinking through different processes. So for us, this show here, it was presented at the same time as the show Orlando, which is now at CO Berlin. It was curated by Tilda Swinton, and it was really kind of, it's really about very, how do you say, actuel, very, very contemporary things, issues that are kind of socially, politically relevant, but also on the level of representation. So for us, that's also always a starting point to think about, the structure of visuality, but the politics of representation, and to see how that kind of relates to what's happening in the discourses also around us in society. And what we really tried to do was really try to contextualize this show through not only text material, but also through inviting other people to think of what it means to have these works in the Swiss context, and how we as an institution should deal with the problematics that arise. And I think, that there is so much ambivalence and so much problems in doing things and not doing things, and there is always something you do wrong. And for us, it was very important to have like a very open dialogue about what are the pitfalls that might happen if we work in a certain way or present a certain artist. So there was a lot of dialogue and a lot of time spent talking about things over and over and over again, and considering what it means to do so in a Swiss context and an institution like ours.
Is there a conversation among institutions to how to decolonize their collection or depatriarchize their collection at the moment? I mean, what is little known is like in the history of photography, Swiss photographers emigrated to North Africa and created very important studios where family dynasties over several generations, and that history has not been very well researched or documented, even in Switzerland. Mm-hmm. So I'm interested to know, like, this relation between the colonial history of Swiss photography, currently practices, institutions. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think the problem with Switzerland, it's also what Frida Pavo mentioned in terms of referring to Norway. We don't have a colonial history, right? We don't have one. So people are not aware that also Switzerland was very much entangled with the colonial endeavors, and they try. So the topic for us is not as prominently discussed as, for example, in other countries that actually had colonies, like the US, that has a very specific kind of race discourse. So colonialism is something that is, I think now it's starting to be discussed, but in the Swiss institutional context, I feel we are very slow when it comes to the questions of colonialism. I think when it comes to a more kind of the patriarchal view and maybe the male-dominated way of having collected or having displayed, that's by now more obvious, and institutions are tackling it. But I think the colonial history and the colonial entanglements, there we still have a lot of work to do, and it's something that seems it's just kind of beginning. on an institutional level at least. Yeah.
Is there also a question from the audience that you would like to address regarding this exhibition or the museum at large?
Okay. Yeah, I have a question about the material. And I don't know if anyone have ever seen one of her works in real life, because it's something very different from seeing it on a screen, because she works with very fragile paper works, as you can say, and then the whole body you see is sticked with a little pins. And when I was standing in front of one of her works, and I was thinking, okay, this is everything you can do with a photograph of a body. It's soft and it's strong in the same time. It screams at you and it's very calm. And then you have this very fragile paperwork, which maybe is very horrible for a curator to work with, because it looks like it can fall from the wall and is gone forever. And have you ever talked about this with her? About this fragility of her work and about how to present this body in this way, being violent with these pins and fragile with the material?
I mean, it is something that she very much thinks about, this transformation into physical objects. So the interesting thing is she used to make, I mean, as I said earlier, when she was still a child and in the more analog age, she would do like physical collages. But then once the internet came and computers came, she started kind of taking images from online and working digitally, so creating her collage on digital surfaces. And then Arthur Jaffa found her Instagram account and transported her into the art spaces, and that's where for the first time she actually thought about what she had to do to give these collages the presence in the space as actual bodies that incorporate all of the elements you were just so nicely kind of summarizing. This is very much part of her reflection in how she wants to portray these bodies and how she wants to give them agency and how she wants to transform them from objects into subjects, and how she wants to position the viewers in front of them. And that's kind of also the power of her work. I mean, I've been very much theoretizing the whole thing because also I don't have the experience, and from a photography theory background, I see this as my task to also kind of make people or our visitors understand that these are complex issues that are at work when they look at photographs or when they take photographs. But this is really kind of, these are all the things she wants us to feel. And she really manages, I feel, to create that's really art, right? That's the moment that you cannot put into words, the moment you cannot theorize. It's something that happens to you when you stand in front of these images. And that's her artistic intention.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is a very strong hapticity in her work
Yes.
that triggers emotion and image resisting. It's this back and forth that is, the physicality, the monumentality of these works is... is
Absolutely.
very strong. Are there more questions? Yes?
Is there a publication about this? Did you do a catalog or things like that?
We made a nice booklet because Sjaatje's previously made a publication in Trondheim, at the Kunsthal Trondheim. And this one is available. It was published by Sternberg Press.
Okay.
And then we sold that publication. We didn't find it necessary to make just another one, and then we made a very nice kind of booklet, where we try to also incorporate Frida's conceptual background into the way it was designed, and because we also found it very necessary to have Frida's voice directly being able to address our visitors and to explain also from her point of view and to give this context about what the images are about and where they come from, and make people understand really the background to her work. yeah, so it's Kunsthalle Trondheim, Sternberg Press.
Okay, thank you very much.
I have another question. I was wondering, in the back, I was wondering if you could talk about the titles a bit more, because for the one image, the girl on horse, I reckon the title is quite obvious, but for the weather girl, I don't really connect the title and the image, but at the same time, the weather girl opens up all the cliches about well, weather girls and women on TV.
So that's also a very interesting point. If we go back to the earlier works, all of Frida's works were untitled. And she kind of resisted giving the works titles because for her, again, that was kind of putting it in a box and already kind of directing the viewer to a certain form of understanding that she didn't want. She wanted to leave it open. And she told me that now that she's suddenly became so famous and everyone is also interested in showing and buying her work, that it's just become very impractical to not have any titles and have every work be called untitled. So she started giving titles. And obviously now by adding the titles, she also reflects in how that framing, can help support or add a certain layer, like with the Batwoman. I think that really kind of helps, give this more contemporary angle also to the work. But it's something she's actually quite resistant to. And also in finding an exhibition title, I mean, in the end, we ended up using a quote from Elaine Kahn. She's a US-American poet, singer-songwriter, and author. And it was actually it was a quote or a poem that Frida had encountered when she was searching the net, and she integrated it into her video work, and that's where we saw it, and we thought, it's something that resonates with her, and it's kind of opens up this, I have seen a million pictures of myself. It really opens up this representational discussion that we want to have specifically for the photo museum. Yeah.
It is also an interesting question if we look at it historically, because until World War II, we could say it was. I read an interview of the German photographer Giselle Freund, and she was saying that when she started as a photojournalist, it was considered that a woman could not write about photography. So she invented an alter ego named John Anderson that would write the caption of her photograph while she was doing documentaries, And so we have this legacy. Or even Diana Arbus, in her text, she also speak about her struggle to have the right to write her own caption to her images. So I find this tension also with the title and the images that are created, as you pointed out, also very interesting, and has a long history even to claim that space it has a gendered perspective there too, which is often overlooked.
That's very interesting. Thanks.
Yeah,
There's another question.
Yeah, thank you, Doris, for these insights into the exhibition, which I could not see in Winterthur, but I could see some of her work in Aal. Also thank you for Alex to point out these very haptical, special dimensions of her works, the different layerings. That was something I also found very fascinating when I saw it for the first time. But what I actually wanted to ask you is whether you could give a little more insight into her process of assembling her materials, because you already pointed out that while searching for the images on the internet, she encountered the embedded racisms of indexing images, but you also only refer to Googling the images in a broader sense. But I can imagine that also collections of images, for example, museums putting their collections online, probably
offering high-definition images plays an important role, and I just wanted to know whether you could elaborate a little more on this, because then the institution gets back into the questions of what kind of material or images you can find online and how this kind of reflects back into her work just by the kinds of materials and images being accessible for her to use.
Yeah, thanks a lot for the question. So for her, Frida said that she's actually not a very good searcher of specific images, but she loves images, and she really has this incredibly strong passion for imagery, and she tries to consume as many images as possible. So she just kind of she just goes on the internet and then she just starts looking at things that she finds interesting, maybe art or some article about from a medical context that she's interested in also as a sociologist. She starts reading, and then she kind of gets into a topic. She encounters an image that she likes, and then she saves an image. Like whenever an image speaks to her in some way, she finds it intriguing, it resonates, she saves it on her computer. And then in the process, kind of her collages take form and shape, and then she starts looking for specific kind of fragments that she wants to collage together. And there she realized that once she blows the images, the collages up to life size, and not just has them on a computer display, they need to have a certain kind of resolution. So then she might have encountered an image somewhere where she wants to take the fragment of it, but the resolution is too low. So she goes on eBay, for example, to look for these images that from colonial contexts that are being sold on eBay. So, I mean, the circulation process is crazy, right? Or she goes to specific kind of collections that might, present their images in high resolution to actually look for the body parts she wants to take and she wants to use. And then in the process, she might specifically look for something. She feels like, okay, now I need this, and then she starts Googling. So it starts really more from a very general approach of consuming images, of watching movies, of watching YouTube, of looking through art, and then being inspired by that. And then while it takes shape, she goes specifically looking for certain parts. And also maybe what's important is in the beginning, she was really working, she said about 90% of her works, of her collages were from images from colonial contexts, but now also she's moved a bit away from that, and she's expanding it to include more maybe also art, pop cultural backgrounds, more contemporary kind of image contexts. Did that answer your question?
Thanks, Doris. It was super interesting to hear your curatorial perspective on it as well. And I have a question on, because you just mentioned it in a side sentence, but talking about selling her work, I think this is super interesting because, as you mentioned just now, these produced imagery within the colonial context gets still, without any context, gets sold on eBay and everything, and it's so questionable what's happening there. But it's a fact, it's happening. So she is using these mechanisms to put her own, how do you say, to reframe the agency of this by working with it. So now we have the case that obviously since Arthur Jaffa, which I didn't know, but it's super interesting, encountered her, discovered her, she's now so famous that she is in power of selling her work, and she's in power of deciding who to sell her work. And I would love to know how she, or if she has a frame work in which she, or a a set of rules for herself who to sell her work to, because I think this is really, really, really super important when it comes to her work, to think of how do I want to accelerate my own imagery within the context we are just like living in.
Yeah, thanks a lot. It's a very interesting question. We also spoke about it with Frida. I think what's really interesting again in her practice is that it's something she does first and foremost for herself. She says, I have to produce these collages, otherwise there is no me. Like, this is something I have to do. But now that she's become famous, she really thinks a lot about which of the collage she wants to make accessible to the outside. Be it, first of all, in shows, like, do I want to expose this subject to the viewers? What viewers kind of do I expose it to, in what context? And then also kind of course, this selling them, that's like, yeah, another layer of mindfuck to the whole discussion, right? So she really thinks about which ones she feels comfortable to sell, and she has the policy that she really, she first and foremost sells to institutions where there is the capability, the necessity, and the responsibility to contextualize her work. So for her, that is very important. These are all questions she's thinking about, and I think also she was like really kind of catapulted into this art world, and now all of these questions are coming up that are making her whole practice more and more complex. And I think these are also issues she is constantly working through and maybe, renegotiating her own perspective on it. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I want to go back to that, because now with the change of visibility, you were saying it was more like a diary kind of practice that she published on Instagram, but for a certain public, and then Jaffa saw that, and then the visibility exploded. Like this change of parameters, how that pushed her in a way to think about materiality, to think about selling or not selling, to still being a digital artist in a sense. Like now she's gathering, thinking about like buying things on eBay or whatever to maybe be part of a market or like exhibiting. How does she deal with this change?
Yeah, thanks. It's a very good question. I think she's very good at really differentiating her necessity and need to do it from what other people expect her to do. Even though, of course, working with her as a curator, I would, like to just shed her, like keep the art world away from her and just let her do her work, because of course all these outside can also have very negative effects on your artistic practice, right? Because you have to start thinking about so many things and who you want to please and where it becomes problematic, and suddenly there are other voices in a practice that is very personal. And it really also kind of changes her practice, of course. For Instagram is a very good example. She said in the beginning it was just her mom and her sister kind of cheering at her, saying, "Oh, wow, that's very cool." And she would kind of try out the sequence of 9 images, because for her the sequences and being able to narrate a certain feeling or expression in those 9 images is very important, and she could test it out. But now when she starts testing and she posts one image, people are already reacting and giving a response, and she can no longer use it for a process-based work. She has to do it at home in a non-public platform, and once she's happy with it, that's when she publishes the whole set of 9 images. So it really changes kind of her practice in a way. And I think, yeah, by still creating the collages she wants to, but then thinking more actively about what she wants to make public, that's where she's more thinking about these questions, and where she tries to really keep keep the questions out of her actual practice and not make them interfere with what she feels for herself is the right way of doing things. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for now. Thank you, Doris, and thank you, Delphine, as well, and thank you to the audience. I think we have to stop now.